Since we're going down that road, how about talking about diarrhea a little bit? Okay, so how do we know your goat has diarrhea? What are some of the causes? What could some of the things we can use to treat? I know you're going to say call your vet first, but anyway, go ahead.
So diarrhea is very obvious. The animal
Hmm.
is going to be, pooping out his or her intestine. Not all diarrhea is caused by, very bad things like bacteria and whatever. A lot of people see diarrhea and they say, "Oh, bacteria and whatever." Coccidiosis, it's a one of the main culprits you have in your goat farm, especially your kids.
Hmm.
That can cause a lot of diarrhea, and once you have that, you really can't get around treatment. But the only way you can know if you have coccidiosis or it's just a normal bacterial infection or it's what we call nutritional scours, which I'll talk about in a minute. If you have um, coccidiosis plague in your farm, treatment is, you have to treat your animal. There's no getting around that. And there's a difference in how you treat with coccidiosis from your bacterial infections. It's very different class of drugs, because you can give all the antibiotics in the world and it will not affect your coccidiosis, you know, in your kids. So we need to figure that out. We need to know that, and the only way you can know that is by collecting samples, looking under your microscope and seeing whether or not you have what we call the oocyst that comes from the coccidiosis.
Hmm.
In terms of nutritional scours, um, this is something that we talk about when it comes down to pigs a lot, but for goats, it's also very relevant.
Hmm.
If you're trying to feed stuff that the animals cannot digest, um, they might have scours, they might have diarrhea. If you're changing your nutrition on your animals too fast for different type of
Okay.
formulation, animals could have diarrhea because when you're changing anything you're changing in terms of diet, it has to be a slow, very slow transition. So you can't just take away this one and throw that one in. Animals could have diarrhea very quickly, and
Hmm.
the only way you can fix that is by allowing them time for the microflora, the microorganisms inside the stomach to actually die off. And once those die off and new ones to come around, and then your diarrhea will subside. So to prevent that, you have to ensure that you do a very slow transition, anywhere from 5 to 7 days if you're changing feeds, for example. So those are some of the main cause. So sanitation, we go back to that. If your sanitation is poor, your animals could come down with lots of diarrhea,
Hmm.
bacterial.
Hmm.
So if your place is nasty, obviously you're gonna have a challenge with that. So
Okay.
something that people need to pay close attention to. And
Got it.
also, if the place is wet and cold, animals could also have diarrhea.
Okay. So, did we talk about the treatment for diarrhea, or what are we going to treat with it for diarrhea? Or just let it run its
So
course?
generally, I will not give out treatments just like that. But
Okay.
for
Sorry.
different types of diarrhea, there is different types of
Hmm.
treatment.
Hmm.
And as I said, for coccidiosis, it's a different type of organism, so it's a different class of drugs that we have to use. If we're dealing with, and generally, we'll also give that class of drugs, plus we'll also give antibiotics because there's always going to be secondary infections. But if you look at the feeds that, Nutrimix feed, for example, in a goat feed, it will tell you that there are certain medication inside the feed, for example, salinomycin or other medication that those are for prophylaxis that prevents the occurrence of coccidiosis.
Okay.
For some feeds, for example, if you look at certain types of pig feeds, there will be low amounts of certain antibiotics to prevent certain occurrence of ileitis or gastrointestinal problems. So you
Hmm.
will find that. But when it comes on to treating diarrhea, the first thing that we need to ensure is that diarrhea is pooping out a lot of water.
Hmm.
All of that water needs to go back in. So you
Okay.
need to the
Yeah.
first thing to and when animals have diarrhea, it's not the bacteria that will kill them or whatever. You know what kills them? It's dehydration.
Hydration.
Dehydration. And so you have to rehydrate the animal, and water alone cannot do it. So you need to, because they are losing water, a lot of it, and they're
Hmm.
losing quite a bit of electrolytes. So you need to replace the water and electrolytes. So things like Pedialyte, some of those vitamins or electrolytes in water, and drenching the animals with that at least 2, 3, 4 times a day as much as possible. The more
Okay.
you put in, the better. But we don't want to overhydrate,
Hmm.
because you can run into other problems too. Because there is also a condition that is called water poisoning, and you can find that in animals. There's salt poisoning and there's water poisoning. So you really
Hmm.
don't want to overhydrate and do it too quickly. So you need to measure it. But the first rule of thumb is if you're having diarrhea, If water is coming out at the back end, water needs to be going in at the front end.
Okay. Are there any kids too young that if like how am I saying this? Can a kid be too young to give them like Pedialyte, or when do you just kind of leave it and watch it, or when do you?
If they're day old and they're having diarrhea, treatment is necessary.
Okay.
And
okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That was a good question that I asked in a bad way, but I'm glad you figured out what I was asking.
There are no bad questions in my opinion.
All right. Very good.